On April 29, 1945, the day American soldiers liberated Dachau, they discovered 2,000 corpses stacked in sealed train cars. But what happened next shocked even hardened veterans. The liberators became executioners, and the men they killed, they were the very guards who had run one of history's most notorious death camps. When does justice end and revenge begin? Dachau wasn't just a concentration camp. It was a system, opened on March the 22nd, 1933, just weeks after Hitler took power. It was the model every other camp was built on. Over 200,000 prisoners passed through its gates across 12 years. At least 41,500 never left. By the time American soldiers arrived that April morning, the camp had long stopped being a place people survived. It had become a place people were processed, catalogued, broken, used up, and discarded. The SS guards who ran it weren't reluctant participants. They volunteered. They were trained for this. And on Liberation Day, some of them were still there, standing in the wreckage of what they'd built. What happened between those soldiers and those guards in the next few hours is one of the most morally complex, emotionally raw, and deeply human moments in the entire history of the Second World War. Here's what most people don't know about Dachau. It wasn't announced quietly. Heinrich Himmler held a press conference on March the 20th, 1933. He stood in front of journalists and told them a new camp was opening near Munich for political enemies of the state. It was published in newspapers the next morning. The Nazis were not hiding. They were advertising. The first prisoners were political, communists, journalists, Catholic priests, anyone who criticized the regime publicly. A statement was being made. This is what dissent costs. The message landed. Opposition to the Nazi government largely collapsed within months. But here's where the story gets darker, and this is the part that rarely gets framed correctly. The SS Totenkopfverbände, the Death's Head units assigned to run the camps, were not ordinary soldiers reassigned to unpleasant work. They chose this. They signed up specifically for camp duty, went through ideological conditioning that stripped prisoners of humanity in their minds before a single punch was thrown. That distinction matters, because it changes the question from "how did this happen?" to "how do you build a human being capable of this?" And the answer historically is, surprisingly easily, with the right system in place. Survivor Ellie Gotts, who was sent to Dachau with his father at 17, described it simply: "We slept on hard boards. We got nothing to eat. We had no washing facilities. I didn't have a shower for 10 months. The lice were drinking our blood." He said those words 80 years later, calmly, precisely, because some things don't blur with time. They sharpen, now. April 29th, 1945. The 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, are pushing fast through Bavaria. The war has maybe 6 days left, though no one knows that yet. They receive coordinates for a camp outside Munich. Standard sweep. Move in, secure, report back. They never reported back the standard way again. Before they even reached the gates, they found the train. 39 freight cars on a rail siding, sealed. The smell reached them first. Soldiers described it as unlike anything combat had produced. They forced the doors open. Inside, approximately 2,000 bodies. Prisoners transferred from other camps as the Allies closed in, following Himmler's direct order, and this is documented, that not a single prisoner must fall alive into enemy hands. They had been loaded into those cars and simply abandoned. Some had been dead for weeks. Some had died hours before the Americans arrived. Think about that order for a moment. Not defend the camp, not evacuate the guards, kill the prisoners before they can be freed. That was the standing directive. That was the bureaucratic logic of the SS. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, commander of the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, a combat veteran of Sicily, Italy, and southern France, walked past that train and entered the camp. He would later say Dachau was different from everything else he had seen, and this man had been at Anzio. Inside, 32,000 prisoners remained. Many couldn't stand. Some weighed as little as 65 pounds, documented in survivor accounts. Eduard Kornfeld, a survivor, later described being freed at 27 kilograms body weight. 27 kilograms. That is the weight of an average 7-year-old child. American soldiers were told by their officers, do not feed the survivors. Medical teams would handle nutrition. The men who had been starved couldn't be given full rations immediately. It would kill them. So soldiers who wanted desperately to do something human, something immediate, had to stand there, watching, waiting for doctors. That specific helplessness, documented in veteran accounts, broke something in many of them, and then the soldiers found the guards. Around 560 SS personnel had not fled. Some were still at posts. Some tried to blend into the prisoner population. Some were simply cornered. What happened next unfolded across multiple locations in the camp, and no two witnesses told exactly the same story, which is itself historically important because it means what happened was not organized, it was not commanded, it erupted. Near the camp's coal yard, a group of SS guards was lined against a wall. Soldiers opened fire. The US Army's own investigation, conducted between May 3rd to 8th, 1945, titled American Army Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau, found that at least 21 SS men were confirmed killed by American soldiers, with the real number likely between 35 and 50. A separate account from historian Jürgen Zaruski's 1997 research, based on 1945 interrogation records that only became available in 1992, places 16 SS shot in the coal yard and 17 more killed at Tower B. The numbers remain disputed. The fact of it does not. Sergeant Howard Buchner, in his 1986 account, alleged the number reached 520, including a mass execution ordered by First Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead. That figure is considered an outlier by most historians, and Buchner was not a direct witness to the alleged mass event. But the fact that the number is still debated, that no one was ever fully held to account, tells you everything about how the US military chose to process this. General George Patton reviewed the investigation, but the case was ultimately closed without charges. Now, I want to be honest with you about what I think happened here, and I think this matters. By the law, those soldiers were fighting to uphold the Geneva Convention. What happened in that coal yard was a war crime. Surrendered prisoners cannot be executed. That is the rule. That is the line. And it was crossed, clearly. But when I look at what those men walked through that morning, the train, the bodies, the 27-kilogram survivors who couldn't stand, I don't think what broke in them was weakness. I think it was something closer to the only honest human response to industrialized evil. They didn't snap because they were violent men. They snapped because they were normal men who had just seen what happens when normal men stop being normal. Here's where I land on this, and you can disagree. The guards deserved to stand trial. They deserved due process, not because they earned it, they hadn't, but because that's what separates a civilization from the thing it's fighting against. When you skip the trial and go straight to the wall, you close the distance between yourself and them, even if just by one step. But I also think if I had walked past that train, if I had looked into those 32,000 faces, if I had seen Eduard Kornfeld at 27 kilograms, I don't know with certainty that I would have been better, and I think anyone who says they definitely would have been is lying to themselves. That's not an excuse, it's the truth, and the truth is always more useful than the comfortable version. A P correspondent, Howard Cowan, embedded with the advancing forces, he filed a report describing how dozens of Nazi guards fell under withering blasts of rifle and carbine fire. His editors ran it without question. Military censorship ensured nothing about the circumstances was probed further. The story the public got was liberation, heroes, freedom. The story that actually happened was messier, more human, and far more difficult. The soldiers weren't the only ones. When the gates opened, prisoners who had the physical strength to move found SS guards, some hiding in barns disguised as civilians, some still in uniform, and attacked them. With fists, rocks, shovels. The historical record confirms between 25 and 50 additional SS guards were killed by liberated prisoners. One American soldier witnessed an inmate stomping an SS guard's face until his words, "There wasn't much left." He said to the prisoner, "You've got a lot of hate in your heart." The prisoner simply nodded. That exchange is documented. That nod said more than a testimony ever could. An American chaplain was told by 3 young Jewish survivors that they had found one of the more sadistic guards hiding in a barn, dressed as a peasant farmer, and beaten him to death. They told the chaplain directly. They were not hiding it. Some American soldiers intervened, some looked away. Lieutenant Bill Walsh witnessed at least one beating and did not stop it. Official reports described the situation as chaotic and beyond normal command structure. The Dachau trials began November 1945. 40 SS defendants, all 40 convicted. 36 sentenced to death. Camp Commandant Martin Gottfried Weiss was executed in May 1946. But here is the number that history quietly swallows. Most of those death sentences were commuted. Under Cold War political pressures, West Germany was now an ally, and executing German officers created diplomatic complications. Dozens of guards who ran gas chambers, who conducted human experiments, who beat prisoners to death in these same yards had their sentences reduced. They were released. They returned to Germany. Some became teachers, some became neighbors, some died quietly in retirement. Eduard Kornfeld, 27 kilograms at liberation, said the Americans treated him with incredible kindness. He was grateful until his death. Meanwhile, the man who decided his daily food ration for 3 years may have lived 20 more years of ordinary life in a quiet German town. That is not dramatic framing. That is documented fact. Dachau still stands. The original iron gate is still there, same gate every prisoner walked through, forged into the metal, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, the same lie, still standing. Over 1 million people visit every year. Most of them stand at that gate for a moment and don't say anything, because there's nothing that fits. Ellie Gotts, 97 years old, a survivor, described the moment an American jeep appeared outside his barrack on Liberation morning. He ran to his father, who was near death, weighing 65 pounds, and said, "Father, we made it. They promised to kill us before the war is over. We are alive." His father looked up and said, "Oh, that's good. Have you got the bread?" He was still holding the bread. That's the moment Gotts calls his liberation. Not the speech, not the flag, the bread, and his father still asking about it. History's most important moments are almost never what the photographs show. They're the bread, the nod, the soldier who looked away, the general who closed a file, the guard who spent 30 more years being someone's grandfather. Dachau didn't end on April 29th, 1945. It just changed. If this episode hit different, subscribe to support the channel and watch our video on the Nuremberg executions next. The link is right there.